So thank you again for meeting with me. I want to give you a little bit about my background and why I started this, and then we could get to chatting. I lost August 30th. My best friend from college passed away. And then 3 days later, my sister passed away from the floods from Hurricane Ida.
Wow.
So it was it's been a very rough few months. And through my experience, I've realized how much grief is not talked about and how grief makes people uncomfortable and how there's never a right thing to say. So sometimes people tend to shy away from even talking about it. So I've been just chatting with people about their experiences. Last week I sat down with, or 2 weeks ago, I sat down with the Catholic priest from the church on the street from us. So I just want to get different, different views from people. And actually my friend who passed away, she was Jewish. And I remember when her mom passed away, we sat the Shiva.
No.
So I just wanted to see, like, as a person of faith in the Judaism religion, what your experiences are dealing with grief and talking with people and whatever you would like to share.
Well, it was one of my most important roles as a rabbi to be a pastor. And, there was nothing more difficult for me as a pastor dealing with people who are ill and then dealing with people who had died. So I think that for me, well, let me tell you about the very first thing that ever happened to me related to this in my career. As I just started my career 45 years ago, a phone call comes into the temple on the Sabbath, which is a day that I don't use the telephone. There were pay phones back in those days, that a member of the congregation was hit by a car and she's at a local hospital. So I went over to the hospital. She survived, but she was injured such that they did not think that she was going to recover from her injuries. Her parents were Holocaust survivors. And I remember sleeping at the hospital in the waiting room with her parents. This went on for about 3 weeks. This was like the beginning of my career. And then she died. Her name was Judy. I'll never forget her. She had a sister. And her parents were obviously, devastated. And I actually thought about, like, do I really want to be a rabbi? Is this really what I signed up for? Because during those 3 weeks, my mind was just with Judy and her family. I think the most important thing that I've learned about people that have lost loved ones is being there for them. My presence, my caring, my physically being with them was pretty well all that I could do. I couldn't make her come back to life. I said to the family that I would be with them for forever, for as long as I was the rabbi, and walk them through the different stages of grief with the Shiva. And then we talked about whether they would like to set up some sort of fund in her memory so that they could keep her memory alive. So that was very sad. She was a teenager, and that was the first loss in my congregation as a congregational rabbi. all losses are losses. Circumstances are different though. So when you have what you had, which was a couple of losses, one almost back to back, it makes it even more severe. But as someone lucky to have grown up in the Jewish religion, I came to appreciate the rabbis that created the laws of mourning, and how helpful they are to the mourner. And I'll basically summarize it in 3 words. These are the 3 principles of death and dying as I see it. One is community. The community in Judaism immediately comes together as a support group to the family who is bereaved, out of love, but also out of obligation. It's an obligation for a person of the Jewish faith to do this because of the importance of we are all connected one to another. So community, very important. Another is the democracy of death. That is to say, we believe that whether you're rich or poor, that being laid to rest should not be something that's ostentatious. So what's recommended is a all wooden casket. Because of dust you are, and unto dust you shall return. No special fanfare, and everybody gets equal treatment. The other principle, in addition to democracy and community, is reality. So we don't wait a long time to bury our loved ones. In fact, we're mandated to do it if we can within 24 hours, which sometimes seems very cruel because it doesn't really give a person time to say much of their goodbyes. But there is a tremendous respect for the body, the person who's created in the image of God. So when a person dies in Judaism, that person is never to be left alone before they are laid to rest. So in my congregation, we had a holy burial group of people who stayed with the person who was prepared for burial, usually at the funeral home, and took time, 3-hour shifts in the room, reading Psalms, reading prayers, and not leaving the person alone. Now, the person has died already. However, because of the concept of respect to the person, the belief is never to leave that person alone, which is very comforting when the family learns that their loved one is not going to be alone even before they are laid to rest. And then, of course, after the burial, the whole requirement of Shiva, which is really an opportunity for family to begin to realize that their loved one is not going to be coming back, at least in the physical sense, so that family and friends come to the home, prepare the meals, sometimes lead prayer services, and are just with the family of the bereaved for a period of up to 7 days, which is extremely comforting and psychologically powerful. I found that those who follow these rites and rituals are helped by it. It doesn't change the fact that they're grieving. It doesn't make them necessarily cry any less, but it gives them a support group to realize that they're not alone. That we're one temple family, and we continue to care for each other in time of joy and in time of sorrow. So I began to give these talks with a priest and a Methodist minister at a graduate social school. I talked about the Jewish way of death and dying, and they talked about their ways of death and dying. And what was interesting is that the priest said that he preferred some of the ideas of the Jewish people because he thought that they were psychologically very, very sound. it is, it's something that, that I'm semi-retired now, so I am no longer the congregational rabbi in Bridgewater. I'm the honorary rabbi, but I still am asked, because I still live in the community, when somebody passes away, and the family knows me, they will often ask me to participate in the funeral, delivering a eulogy, because I was the rabbi of the family as their children were growing up along with
Right.
me. And that makes me feel good that they still want me. And my being there is really important to them, because I was with them in a lot of times of joy. And it gives them comfort to know that, that I know the person, I know their loved one, and that when I speak of their loved one, I can say some meaningful things because I spent years with their
Right.
loved one. So a few years ago, I had an idea to start a bereavement group, which I was never able to do in my career because I was busy at night with meetings. And I called it the Kaddish Club. Kaddish is the Hebrew word for sanctification. And there's a prayer called the Mourner's Kaddish, which is the prayer that a mourner says for a period of a year when they lose a loved one. I opened it up to the entire community. And once a month, we would meet at the temple. And my agenda was we would do some prayers, but to be together, to open it up to having them talk and vent, and just whatever they wanted to say. And then at the end, a little bit of a prayer circle. And I had people not only of the Jewish faith that came to attend. It was a very powerful experience. We were not able to do it, unfortunately, during COVID. I tried it a couple of times on Zoom. It just wasn't as
It wasn't
powerful.
the same. Yeah.
Not for that particular group. I mean, it's one thing to have a lecture, but to have a bereavement group on Zoom was really not the same. And recently, I got a phone call from a family who one of my first families that were really instrumental in getting me the job in Bridgewater in the first place. So one of them died, and their children asked whether I would participate on Zoom in a memorial service for the family, which I did. And like, this was like 40 years ago that I knew them, and they still remembered me, and they reached out to me. And 2 days ago, Chrissy, the husband of this person dies as well. He was the president of the synagogue and a really wonderful person and a physician. And they're probably going to ask me to do something similar, a little memorial remembrance of him with a slideshow, et cetera, et cetera. So, everything that I've ever studied about grief, including even trying to explain it to a child, when I started to read books about, like, what do you do when a child is not quite old enough to understand, but knows that something is not right, something.
Yeah.
How do I explain it in a way that's not going to be, not going to make them frightened? And I'm still a work in progress, because it all depends on the child. There are some children that were 4 years old that read a poem to grandpa's memory. And then there are other family members that won't even have like a 9-year-old child attend the funeral because they're afraid that the child will be too emotional. So these are, some of my thoughts. I mean, I'm now a part-time rabbi in Wildwood, New Jersey. It's a little tiny temple down there. It's an older congregation. The president of the congregation passed away last year. It was really sad. Wonderful, wonderful person. And we've had some other illnesses and deaths. And it's just like, if you have a day when nothing happens, but just nothing happens, that's a good day for me, where it's just like an uneventful day, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But I think the most important thing is the being there for people. It's being present. And the word for funeral in Hebrew, levaya, literally means to accompany. And accompany is really being present. It means being there for for people. And it's of all of the Jewish customs and rituals in my congregation that people want to follow, the ones that they seem most interested in following to the letter of the law are the laws of death and dying, which is interesting. I mean, more than the dietary laws, more than coming to prayer services. When it comes to death and dying, they want to do the right thing. Sometimes they don't know what the right thing is, but they'll say, please, Rabbi, what we want is a traditional funeral. We want a traditional burial. That's the way we want it. So I've kind of learned that it's very, very important to people that they want to pay their respects to their loved ones, and they want to do it according to the tradition of their faith.
I remember when my friend's mom passed away. She passed away 15 years ago when we were starting our sophomore year of college. And I remember doing the Shiva with her, but I remember all the mirrors being covered. Why? What's the significance of the mirrors being covered?
So the covering of the mirrors, as I was taught, mirrors are often used to see yourself. Why do you want to see yourself? Well, you might want to see yourself when you're combing your hair in the morning, putting on makeup. So mirrors kind of became a sign of vanity, a sign of you, yourself, of the me and you. And at a Shiva, the idea of covering the mirrors is so that you don't see yourself, because you may not want to see what you look like, because you're going to look very sad. You're not going to look like you looked, before you lost your loved one. So It kind of became a sign of mourning, that you would cover your mirrors. And also another symbol at the Shiva would be sitting on a low bench or a stool closer to the ground.
I remember that.
Which kind of grounds you. And sitting on the floor was kind of a sign of being in mourning. So traditional people would either sit on boxes or low stools, or they have special chairs where they actually cut the legs lower. And that would also be an indication for a person that was paying a Shiva call, to know who the mourner might be, because I had congregants that would go to all Shivas, even if they didn't know the person who died, or even if they didn't know the family. Why? It's the word community. They felt that it was their obligation. They wanted to be there as a member of the congregation and as of the community, to offer their condolences and say how sorry they were that person lost their loved one, which is a beautiful thing.
Yeah, it is.
When you think about it. And the other mourning sign when one loses a loved one is the cutting of their clothes. So in ancient times, in Bible times, when a Bible character would lose a loved one, they would rip their clothes. They would cut their shirt. They would tear their shirt. The tearing of the shirt was considered an outward sign of mourning. It was an indication that when somebody saw a torn shirt, that the person had lost a loved one. In Orthodoxy, which is the most traditional branch of Judaism, they still cut their clothes. So a rabbi would actually, for a man who lost a father, cut his tie or cut his shirt. Like everything else, there was a thought about, well, that's like wasteful to clothing. There's some people that don't have shirts. You're kind of wasting a shirt. So I don't know in what year it was invented, but they invented black ribbons that you would append to the mourner's clothes. And before the service for the funeral started, the rabbi would cut or tear the ribbon and then say a prayer with the family. And the interesting thing about that prayer is that prayer translates, praised are you, God, who is the true judge. It basically was created by the rabbis so that a person wouldn't lose faith in God or blame God for the death of their loved one. So the mourner is obligated to declare that God is the true judge, even though that person probably does not accept at that moment God's judgment because they don't want their loved one to have died. And they probably prayed that their loved one would not die, and then their loved one dies. So sometimes they may blame it on the one on high.
Yeah.
And the mourner's prayer, which is said, and that's interesting too. There's this prayer that's said by a family in mourning every day for almost a year. That prayer doesn't have a single reference to death in it. It's basically translates, magnified and sanctified be God's name. God, you are great. I will continue to cherish my memories of my loved ones. I will choose life. I will have faith in you. I will not abandon you. And that prayer ends as a prayer of peace, but nothing about death at all in the prayer. So Judaism is very much a living in this world, remembering our loved ones. And we do have a belief in an afterlife. I get a lot of, I started to talk a little bit more about the afterlife when a younger person died and the family was really, really in mourning. And I wanted to give them some hope that maybe there's a life after this life. So I started to do some more reading about the Jewish views. And it's a fundamental principle of Judaism that there's more to this life than the physical life in this world. And that when God created the first man, Adam, he made Adam out of the earth, out of the dust of the earth. And then God says, when Adam dies, you will go back to the ground. But the soul that I gave you, that's my breath, and my breath, because I'm eternal, your breath, your soul will be eternal. So in Judaism, there are quite a lot has been written about this so-called world to come. In Judaism, it's not called heaven, it's called Olam Haba, which is the Hebrew for a future world. So nobody's ever been there and come back and talked about it. But if you read about the Jewish views of the future world, it's a lot better in the future world than it is in this world. There's a lot more cooperation. There's a lot more people doing things for each other. And there's like less jealousy, there's less envy, and much more cooperation and peace. It's just a much more beautiful world. So I'm hopeful that there will be such a place. But I know a lot of people that have died and they're still very much alive because people remember them. They talk about them. They set up things in their memory so that they keep them alive. I mean, look at
we did it with my sister.
All those that lost like loved ones in the gun shootings in Sandy Hook and all of that kind of stuff. These parents still have not recovered from it. What would give them some peace would be some changes of the gun laws, and their whole life now is working to see that some gun laws will be changed so that there won't be mass shootings every other day, as we just had, a couple of days ago. So I was like thinking about, like, if you were to ask me, like, what's the saddest death that I've ever had, the saddest few. So I have two in mind, but they're two different. One is someone that lost a baby a day after the baby was born. And it was one of my students. And that was sadder than can be. Unimaginably sad, because even, a woman that miscarries is a sadness, even though the baby didn't even make it to term. And then there was a guy in Bridgewater that died. They could find no survivors, and the state of New Jersey had him buried. There's a fund for people like that. And I was the officiant. They determined he was Jewish, and the only person in the funeral home was me.
That's sad. Oh.
I didn't know a thing about this person aside from his name. So that was very sad in a different kind of way. There's nothing sadder than you're dying and you're an anonymous, there's nobody there for you. So that was really extremely, extremely sad. And then I've had some amazing funerals, like a guy died in the that was a former congregant before I became rabbi, and he was a famous music writer. He wrote the musical score to Raisin in the Sun. I'd never heard of this guy. So we have a local Jewish cemetery 5 minutes from where I live, which made it really easy for me to, to be able to do funerals without having to drive 2 hours. So this guy dies, and most of the cast in the Broadway play shows up at the funeral, and they sing his songs.
Oh,
It's so beautiful. And in Judaism, music and playing music is not usual, but it was totally appropriate. It was just amazing. It was like
yeah.
being at a Broadway play, and the deceased would have loved it. I mean, it just
Like
would
a
have
perfect send off for him.
oh my God. It was just, it was like literally fantastic. So there are all kinds of different kinds of experiences that, that I'm sure different clergy can have.
Mhm.
But I think what you're doing is fantastic. It is needed. There are when I was watching what's going on in Ukraine, I can't imagine what is going on in the minds of those people that see their loved ones, in mass graves. It's like I never thought I would see something like this in my lifetime. And I'm trying to be helpful to those people as well. Because I did have a guy that I worked with 5 years ago who was Ukrainian, and he had family there. So I stay in touch with him. I know what's going on, and I'm just, praying that, that something will happen where there will just be, at least a stoppage of the shooting, so that people can at least have one night of peace.
Yeah.
If you can't sleep at night, and you don't have food, it's death. It's a slow death, but it's a different kind of death. It's just awful.
Yeah.
So what is your faith?
We are Greek Orthodox.
Okay. So I don't know too much about Greek Orthodox, but I do like Greek diners.
So my family's not Greek.
Okay.
My family's Middle Eastern. We're Palestinian.
Okay.
We were baptized Greek Orthodox.
Okay.
The church that we went to was an Antiochian Orthodox church.
Okay.
I'm very bad when it comes to knowing what the difference is, if I'm being honest.
They have forms. I'm
sorry.
The church clergy have beautiful uniforms that they wear. They're much nicer than mine.
Yeah. My cousin's actually married to a priest. The Orthodox can be married, but I think they have to be married before they become like a full priest.
Okay.
I think that's the rule. So like when you were saying before how when you know the person, obviously makes the funeral, you feel more connected. So my cousin's husband actually did the services for my sister. So it was very personal to him. He's been in our family for, 15 years or so, plus years. So so I can see how that can be beautiful, but like extremely sad.
Yeah.
Because you're part of the family also.
Absolutely. I mean, I officiated at some family members. I was the officiant. I actually needed a rabbi to officiate. I didn't want to be the officiant. I wanted to be sitting next to my mother. But my brothers said, you're the rabbi, you do it. So it was very weird.
Yeah.
Because sometimes rabbis need rabbis to comfort them.
Yeah.
And to keep your batteries running and going. So I definitely applaud you for what you're doing. I mean, it's really extremely, and I do believe that, that there there, that loss is different than, like losing, I don't know, a kidney, but still having one other kidney.
Mhm.
Loss really is a whole that never really becomes whole again. But I think it's what you do with that loss. If you can redeem that loss by doing good deeds and helping other people, it'll make your loss, it'll be easier for you to to continue to live your life and your days.
Yeah.
People that help people, kind people, are really what the world needs more of. And I was very amazed when a 13-year-old girl in one of my teen classes signed up to be one of the people that prepare the dead for burial.
Wow.
She raised her hand because I teach death and dying to bar mitzvah kids, and she raised her hand and said, well, I would like to do that. So I said, happy to have you consider doing it, but I would need to speak to your parents to
Right.
see if your parents would give you permission to do it. So she did it with some adults, that kind of like how you're learning how to drive. You have like you're sitting in a special car and you have the guy that's teaching you how to drive.
Yeah.
So we waited for an older person who had died, so it wouldn't be really, really sad, person that had lived a long life. This girl did it, and I'm still in touch with her now. She has her own children, and she moved away to Texas, but I've never forgotten the fact that, that she's like 14 years old, and she is wanted to do this important thing, namely taking care of a person who had died. It was a beautiful thing.
I think what you said earlier, how you had people stay with the person until their burial, I've never heard that before, but that really, I can understand how that could be comforting for the family. My sister passed away, we found out on a Thursday morning, and her services weren't until the following week on Thursday. So it was a week. And, obviously my parents were distraught, still are distraught. But I think the fact that she was alone for a week made things even harder.
Of course.
That, so, I think that would have been comforting to my parents to know that people, like, she wasn't alone. And even till now, we have, pictures of her all over the house, and every light stays on at night because my dad doesn't want her being alone in the dark.
Sure.
So every light stays on just because of her pictures are there, even at nighttime. So that's something I think a lot of people can get
that's
behind,
great.
behind something like that.
I also had an idea that I would take kids that were 12 years old before their bar mitzvahs to our local cemetery and teach them about the people that were buried there. So I got some negative feedback from parents, like, why are you taking my kid to a cemetery? It's like a very sad thing. And I gave them my reason why. And I said, we really would like you, their mother and father, to come with them. So we arranged for carpools. And this went on for over 20 years. By the 20th year, they were like, they loved it. Some of them came back the next year. So what I did was I walked them around this relatively small cemetery. And when I could stop at a person who I knew, I wanted to introduce them to that person, to let them know something about that person. And then in Judaism, many of the tombstones had Hebrew names and other Hebrew words on them that some of the students might not have been able to decipher. So I taught them what some of the different pictures and things that you might see on a tombstone, et cetera, et cetera. Very, very successful. And then one of the most successful things that I did is I had a class on the Jewish way of death and dying, and held class number 4 at the funeral home. So I took my class to the funeral home to meet the funeral director, who talked about what it's like to be a funeral director and some of his emotions. And then we took them into the room where the body is prepared for burial to show the people how, how this holy group of men who do men and women who do women, what they use. The body is actually dressed in all white. White is a symbol of holiness or purity. So they're not buried in their clothes, but they're buried in this special, a white cap, a white top, a white trousers. And it gave them an appreciation for the fact that, as I said, that rich or poor, everybody gets that same garment. Nobody gets something that's different. It's all, and even the most desirable casket is the plain pine box, which is the cheapest casket that you could possibly buy. It's very simple, but the rabbis didn't want people that were wealthier to show off the people that did not have the means. So
I mean, I that makes sense.
And also it saves the family money in the sense that
it's so
funerals are very
expensive.
expensive. Yeah.
Especially when it's something that you're not expecting.
Yeah, totally. One of the most, probably one of the other memorable deaths was my mother-in-law, who lived in Texas, moved closer to us when her husband died. And she would come to our home every Friday evening for the Sabbath meal. And it's 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon and she doesn't show up. She lived about 1.5 miles from us. So we went over to the house and the door was locked. Her car was parked in the driveway. And I'm thinking, this does not
That's
look
never a good sign.
good. We were able to get into the house. She's laying on the dining room floor. She's gone. She still had the pen in her hand. She was writing a letter. And 2 hours later, I had to be at the temple to really lead a service for a bar mitzvah, having my dead mother-in-law. So I didn't realize this, but when that thing like this happens, you become a suspect. So the police came and they had to interrogate me to make sure that I did not kill her.
Right.
And then I had to go to services and pretend that everything was okay, because I've got a child that I've got to be joyful for. That was extremely difficult.
Yeah, I can't imagine. Oh my God.
So yeah. So I think that a lot of people don't really think about rabbis and ministers and priests as needing people in their time of grief.
Right.
But we are not we're human. And
right.
we sometimes need our own pastors to help us get through. Nobody can get through it by themselves. I mean, nobody can free themselves from grief. You've got to kind of work your way through it. And the more people that you have, I had a guy who lost a beloved sister who wanted to be cremated. Cremation is frowned upon in Judaism. It's not like you can't do it, but it is not the Jewish way. The Jewish way is, you get buried under the ground. Mm-hmm. And he wanted obviously to abide by her wishes, but his problem was that when she was going to be cremated and her cremains were going to be scattered, where would he go to visit her? There was no place for him to go.
Right.
So I, in my rabbi wisdom, went to sleep and came up with an idea. So in the temple, people can buy a plaque on a wall that has lights on either end in memory of their loved one. And that plaque with the lights are turned on several times a year to mark anniversaries of that person's life. And I said to him, why don't you get a plaque for her? And then when you come to temple, you will go up to that plaque and touch it, talk to it or whatever, turn on the light. And that's what he does. And that saved him. He needed a physical place to talk to her. And you know, and if you're cremated and you don't have an urn with the cremains, you have no place to go.
Right.
He needed to have that physical space. So that
Well,
was
we had, I'm sorry to cut you off. The day after the burial, we had a weeping willow tree planted on the side of our house. And we have flowers around it. We've had plaques, people have sent us plaques, you know, my mom has gotten, and it's just surrounds her tree. We call it the Susie tree.
nice.
The wind chimes on it. So you know, she's, you know, we can go visit her at the cemetery, but sometimes you just need that little closeness when you need it. So it's nice to just go outside and just have that moment, like, you know, and it's still at our house. So she's just like,
Wow.
she's, you know.
So I would be remiss if I did not tell you that the loss of a pet is a difficult one for a pet lover.
Mhm.
And I've had many dogs in my life. I'm a dog person, and I have outside of my house, I can see it if I look, for a dog of not that long ago. It's a solar light with a paw thing and it's on a little pergola. And at night the light goes on, and I look at it and I think about my dog.
Yeah.
So even a pet loss, I think a person can be helpful to someone who loses a pet by even writing them a note, Facebook message, something acknowledging the person's loss, because dogs and cats also have souls.
Yeah.
And I do believe that, you know, the grief involved in losing a pet is it's not to be taken for granted. It's serious stuff. I cried when I lost we had a big cry, and I can make myself cry thinking about just my dog. So how
Yeah.
much more so a person?
Right.
Loss is, you know, loss is loss. So,
Yeah.
but I'm a firm believer that, you know, that if you have friends, if you have a structure of somebody that can help lift you up, you're going to be okay, and you are going to be okay.
Yeah, I've learned through this process who my true friends are, and who the people who I can call at 3 o'clock in the morning are, and the people who, you know what, they weren't there when I needed them in the most horrific time of my life. You know, it is what it is, but I've been learning to focus more on people who have been there, because they're the ones who are worth that time in my head.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
we lost quite a few people during COVID in my former temple, and it was very difficult for rabbis that are doing, you know, Zoom burials to that whole Zoom thing is so some good things that have come out of it is that there are a lot of people that are, you know, that are Zooming from work,
Right.
because they can get their work done. Like this meeting with you is good. So, I mean, I think it's great. I mean, I can't, you know, shake your hand, but I mean, I feel like I know you now, but but for some things, Zoom things are difficult. So I still do a Zoom service for this little temple in Wildwood once a week. And it's interesting. I get more people on the Zoom than I did before COVID. Why? Because it's easier to go on your computer when you're in your PJs and you have your cup of tea. You don't have to get dressed.
Yeah.
And you don't have to get in your car. And so the congregation decided that they have me going back to the building again in early May. And they got a donation to do FaceTime Live, to put cameras in the synagogue, so I'll be able to, you know, to broadcast and have more people see the service. I'm hoping that people will come to the building, because it's 145 miles for me to get down to Wildwood.
Yeah.
But we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you a question.
Sure.
In terms of the burial, when my friend passed, is it always a closed casket?
So Judaism recommends a closed casket. There are different branches of Judaism. So I am a conservative rabbi, and I follow many of the traditions. One of them is to close the casket. And the reason for that is it's just considered a sign of respect, that once the person has been dressed in the white clothes and the casket is closed, that'll be it. But there are probably rabbis, for sure, more liberal ones, that would officiate at an open casket funeral or burial.
And then I know you
Closed would be the most preferable.
and I don't think we have that much time left. I know you said you didn't have that time, but when they lowered her in the ground, her husband and the kids and the family members started digging the dirt to go back into the ground.
So that is actually very customary.
I couldn't do it. Am I like horrible that I couldn't like let myself do that?
No, you're not at all. No. I tell people that that's the custom. And sometimes in Orthodoxy, the very traditional, they'll stay there until they fill up the entire grave. It's very difficult in the winter if the weather is bad and the ground is really hard. But I tell people, if you're up to it, you can take a shovelful and put it in. But if you're not up to it, you don't have to. I would never make somebody to do something that would be too difficult for them to do. But the reason why it's a part of Jewish tradition, it's that thing I told you about, which is the reality. The person has died. So it's saying the person is going to be buried in the ground. And if you just leave without anything being filled in, you might wonder, well, is anybody going to ever fill it up? You don't know, because in many Christian burials, the family leaves before it's lowered. In Jewish burials, the first thing I did was I lowered the casket before I even started the service at the cemetery. It went down before it even started. And the reason why I did that is because it's hard enough to watch it going down. Yeah. But it's what we do. So people, when they see it enough, they start getting used to it because it becomes a custom. They're accustomed to it. So as difficult as it is, they learn to live with it. Not every law that was ever created in a faith works psychologically for people. You never want to force something on someone. There's some people that don't want to sit Shiva. Some people will say, my loved one has been in a nursing home for 7 years and I've been sitting Shiva. They've been out of it with dementia. I don't want to spend 7 more days crying. I've been crying for the last 7 years.
Right.
And what I say is fine with me. I would never, if that's what works, because Shiva is meant to help the bereaved. Right. It's not meant to give them more than they can possibly handle.
And then the unveiling of the tombstone after a year.
So that's usually done within a year after the custom.
That with her mom.
Yeah, that people that very close family would come back after, usually within a year, and they would put a white covering over the stone and then pull it off, and then the officiant or somebody would read what's written on it. Mm-hmm. And then that kind of gives them closure. And supposedly the soul, once that's done, has reached the world to come. Like the unveiling is kind of like he's arrived. She's arrived in paradise, that kind of thing.
I like that.
I'll tell you one thing that'll put a smile on your face. It'll be like, it's a thought question. So when the person's soul finally gets up to heaven, the world to come, the rabbis had an idea that there are 2 angels that open up a gate to let the person in. And the angels ask the person 4 questions before they get in. This is like a famous, so I often ask people, what do you think the very first question is? Like, what would the angel want to ask? So it's funny, you get different answers. So the question that the angel asked, according to the rabbis, is, were you honest in your business dealings? Did you deal honestly with people? Did you do something to make a difference? Did you ever study something new? nothing about like how often did you attend prayer services? None of that. It's
Yeah.
all about ethics. And when all is said and done, I think that really what I would like to see in every person is kindness, humility, and somebody that's just, that fair-minded. And those are the people that I gravitate to, and those are the people that usually people like to gravitate toward.
Right.
Because there are a lot of people that, that claim that they're religious, but they steal, they commit fraud, but yet they say they're still religious. Oh, I just made a mistake. I just stole $500,000.
Right.
No, you can't do that. Yeah.
Right.
So, yeah. Whereabouts do you reside?
I'm in Bridgewater.
Oh, so have you ever been to my temple?
No.
Really? Because we've had like interfaith Thanksgiving Eve services there for like years.
Yeah, no.
So you've never ever have you ever passed it?
Which temple?
Temple Shalom. We're on North Bridge Street where the library is.
Oh, then I've definitely passed it.
Okay.
Maybe not realizing that I passed it, but I definitely,
There you go.
I definitely
Wow.
passed it. Yeah.
Wow. Well, you're certainly welcome to, to step inside. If you ever want to see a prayer service of mine, I'll send you the link.
Okay.
And then you can go on it like everybody else. You don't have to show your face. You could be eating, and you can see the fact that I do music therapy during the week. So I'm a guitar player. So I play for people in hospice.
Oh, I
Yeah.
want to connect those people in hospice to talk to them about their experiences.
Yeah. So that's, if you want to speak to a really good Jewish hospice chaplain, I'll send you his link. He's a rabbi.
Awesome.
He's the rabbi of a Jewish hospice. And that's all he does is deal with hospice people of all faiths. He might be willing to chat with you.
Oh, I would love that if he's willing to.
And then, you're going to get it. He's very traditional. So he's on the Orthodox side, but a very nice guy and a very hard job, because all he does is he sees people in hospice. And at least I got to see people not in hospice in my congregation, that kind of thing. So I'll definitely send that on to you.
That'll be wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. So I enjoy the opportunity, really.
Yeah, thank you so much for chatting with me.
100%. And
I learned a lot.
I hope that you will, feel free to reach out to me again if there's something that you need to know or you didn't understand. I'd be happy to.
Do you know what I think would be a cool idea? If you're interested, if you're willing to have you and the Catholic priest who I spoke with, and my cousin's husband, who's an Orthodox priest.
That'd be pretty amazing.
That would be awesome to like see everyone's
take.
Yeah.
That would be something cool. Yeah. And you can count me in if you're interested in that. I that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Because what that does is it just expands the whole, the whole death and dying thing, and kind of talks. I mean, I would learn new things because I don't know about it, and they would learn some things about us. Yeah. So we could find out, like, what do we have in common? What's different? And are there any ideas that I would like to take from them that I could use? Yeah. Vice versa. That's a great idea.
I will definitely keep
people
you
love that kind
posted.
Of stuff. Yeah. People love that kind of stuff. Yeah. It's kind of like a panel of, yeah. So,
awesome. I'll definitely keep you posted if that happens.
Absolutely. Well, you have my contact now.
Yes. Awesome. Thank you so much. It was really nice meeting you.
My wish for you is more bright days ahead.
Thank you.
But definitely it was an honor to have met you. And just stay healthy, stay well, and keep praying for all those places that have no peace. Yeah. The more prayer, the more action, the better things will be. So yeah. All the best, and
you too.
Keep up the good work. Okay.
Thank you.
Take care. All right.
All right. Bye-bye.